G'day legends. In this video, I'm going to share with you the secret to getting huge drum tones. If you've been struggling to make your drums stand out in your mixes and just getting them to sound big and massive, well then stick around because there's a bunch of techniques I'm going to show you to hopefully help you get your drum sounding huge. Now we are working with live drums in this video, but these techniques can be applied to MIDI drums as well. Everyone loves a good before and after, so I'm going to play you what the drums sound like without these techniques, and then we're going to apply all of the techniques that I'm going to show you in this video, so you can hear exactly what this is adding to our drum sound. So this is what the drums sound like before. And this is what they sound like after the processing. Sounds massive. Have a listen to that in the context of the mix. So as you can hear, it is a massive difference after we apply all of these techniques I'm about to show you. Taking it from that kind of really raw, sort of a bit more basic drum sound to a really big, polished, over the top kind of drum sound. And now I've got all of these techniques happening at once in this mix, but obviously you don't have to have all of this stuff. Even just applying one or two of these techniques can sometimes be enough to get the drums really slamming. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is applying drum samples to a mix. This is something you kind of need to do pretty early on. If you do a lot of processing and then try to apply drum samples later, sometimes it can be pretty tricky, especially if you do some really heavy top-down mixing. If you add a lot of EQ to your drum bus and then you try and add drum samples in, all of that processing is going to be applied. And if you didn't have those samples in there to start with, they might sound really bad after that processing is applied. So that's why I would suggest deciding early on if you want to use drum samples. And for this particular mix, I'm using some samples just to really beef these drums up and make them sound way bigger than they are. So I've got a couple of samples in here on the kick, snare, and the toms, just really reinforcing the close mics, just to really beef them up. And within those samples, you get things like room sounds, which really make the drum sound really lively and big, which is a nice additive to your drum sound. So let me show you what the mix sounds like with and without the samples. So you can hear the samples are adding a bit of extra punch, a bit of extra room sound, just making the drum sound a little bit bigger. Now, the samples that I'm using are actually some of my own, and if you want to check them out, there's a link in the description below. I just released a Tama Birch Babinga sample pack, includes a kick, 2 octabands, we've got a side stick, we've got 2 snare drums in different tunings, and we've got 3 rack toms and 2 floor toms, and I'm using these in the mix as well. These are made specifically for use within Stephen Slate's Trigger 2. You get top mic, bottom mic, overheads, room mic. There's 1176 style compression, saturation, and reverb. And you pretty much get all of those options with all of the drums, which makes it really fun and easy to dial in these drum samples just right. They're all multi-velocity with round robin, so they do have a nice dynamic range. If you want to check that sample pack out, there is a link in the description below. Head over to my store, check it out. It's a massive support to this channel, and I really appreciate it. Now, I'm definitely not saying you can't get a great big drum sound without using drum samples, but it definitely does help. And even if you just blend them in like I am with your real drum sounds, it helps just to add a bit of extra impact. Now, the next thing to getting a really nice big drum sound is just getting your balance right. So if you've loaded in your drum samples, you've done a little bit of a mix with EQ, compression, whatever, but you've also balanced out your levels and got them sounding right to make the kit sound really big and punchy. If your room sound is super loud, then you're going to have a really boomy, washy kind of drum sound. Room sounds are important to making a drum sound big, but if your room sounds too loud or your overheads are too loud, you're going to lose the punch, you're going to end up with a lot of cymbal wash, and you're going to lose a lot of definition. So it does depend on the sound that you're chasing. For this, I'm going for that really big, polished, larger than life drum sound. big kicks, big snares, big toms, and then some nice cymbals all washing in there with it. So if that's the kind of thing you're chasing, then it's all about getting a really nice balance of those close mics with your overheads, where you just have enough cymbals that it sounds good. You can hear all the cymbals, but they're not jumping out and being really abrasive, and then just blending in that room sound just to add a little bit of bigness to the kit. So if you have a listen to the drums, you'll notice the cymbals aren't overbearing. So you can see the close mics are quite loud and punchy. We don't have our overheads quite as loud as that. And then our room mics are a little bit lower than that. That's generally my kind of balance, unless I'm going for a specific effect, like cranking up the rooms to get a really big boomy sound. Another thing that is important to getting a nice big drum sound is the panning as well. So if you've got stereo overheads, you're gonna wanna pan them out almost hard left and right. If you don't like panning things out hard left and right, just bring them in a little bit. For this mix, I don't have them panned hard left and right, but they're pretty close. My room mics are panned hard left and right, but then I have my cymbals matched up with their positioning with the overheads, and I'm panning them out about 50%. Same with your toms, make sure you pan them out a little bit left and right. Just creates some nice separation and keeps the mix sounding interesting. Now, another part of achieving a huge drum sound is getting your drum bus processing right as well. So you want to have all of your individual channels, all of your buses, your sub mixes, like if you've got all of your kicks being sent to a bus like I do here, all of your snares to a bus, all of your toms to a bus, all of that stuff needs to be sent over to your drum bus. So everything's coming into one stereo bus. And on that bus, you can apply some processing. Usually I don't try and overcomplicate this. Usually it's just a little bit EQ, a little bit of compression, and maybe a limiter or a clipper just to catch the peaks and chop them down a little bit. This is a pretty important part of the process, controlling the dynamics of the drums so that they aren't overbearing in the mix. If you don't control the peaks, you'll export your mix for mastering and you'll notice there's lots of spikes coming out of your mix, really spiky looking mix. That'll mostly be transients from drums. And if you don't have a limiter or a clipper controlling those transients, it's gonna make mastering the track really hard. It's gonna make getting it loud difficult. So if you want a loud mix and big sounding drums, then having something on your drum bus to control the dynamics is super important. So let me take you through the processing I have here. Basically, really simple EQ, half a dB, high shelf. I just wanted to add a little bit of extra brightness to the drums. Little cut around 264 Hertz. This is like a bit of muddiness. So just getting rid of some of that. And then a half dB boost from around 80 Hertz, just adding a little bit of thump to the low end of the drums. So pretty basic processing right there. So you can hear it cleans it up a little bit. It's nice. It's not dramatic, but it's nice. Now I do have VMR on here, Slate Digital's virtual mix rack. I have VCC. This does add a little bit of coloration. It's the Brit 4KE channel, which is applying the tone that you would get from running a mix through an SSL desk. I know it's kind of subtle, but I like what it does. That's not a super important step. That's just something I like to do. Now, the next plugin I have on here is just some compression, basically like SSL style compression. I'm using the Slate Digital FG Grey. Got a fairly fast attack, 1 millisecond, sort of grabbing the peaks a little bit, but still letting a little bit of snap through. Got a really fast release just because it's kind of an aggressive drum sound. I want it to really pump and just release quickly. 3:1 ratio, anywhere between 2 and 4:1 is kind of where I will put my ratio for drum bus compression. I usually just play around and see what sounds good. Landed on 3:1 on this, like the way it sounded. Sometimes I'll have the high pass filter going, sometimes I won't. So for this mix, I didn't want to let too much low end through. I kind of wanted the kick to hit the compressor. I like the way it sounded. So have a listen to what we got going on here. So it's kind of like the glue. It's not really changing the sound dramatically, rather than just kind of combining it together. You can hear it all becomes a little bit more cohesive once the compression's on there, and it's sort of just pushing the drums all together into one sound. When you take it off, you can hear the drums are a little bit more spikier, a little bit more dynamic, like the kick and snare kind of poke through a little bit more, and it doesn't sound totally like it's part of the kit, but the compression glues it all together, which is really cool. And then lastly, I've got a limiter on here at the moment, but I'm going to show you what it sounds like if we use a clipper instead as well. This is the Waves L3 LL Ultra Maximizer, cozy and warm profile, and then I've just pulled it down in the center so we're not getting any extra loudness added. We're just bringing the ceiling down until we get a couple of dBs of gain reduction. Usually anywhere between 2 to 3 to 4 dBs is kind of cool on the snare drums, sort of just crushing it down a little bit, controlling those snares and those really peaky sounds that jump out. Now you can see it's not really doing much yet, but once we apply a bit more processing, it's going to push a little bit of extra volume into the drum bus, and this will start working a little bit more. So we might come back and review it once we've got all of our extra techniques applied in here. But you will notice it does change the tone slightly. It does give it a kind of thicker, warmer tone. So I definitely noticed the kick has extra thump when I put this limiter on the kit, and the snare also just sounds a little bit thicker. I would say it kind of rounds the edge off the drums just a little bit in a really pleasing way, but sometimes you want your drums to be really crisp and sharp, and if you want that, then you're probably better off using a clipper. It's a little bit more transparent. So have a listen to what it sounds like with a clipper, and then I'll kind of jump between the two so you can hear the difference. Got the Black Soul Audio clipper, super easy one to use. All you do is pull down the threshold, and if you want to boost some extra gain, you can turn it up here, but I'm not doing that. I'm just bringing the ceiling down to get a little bit of clipping going on. So we've got that at minus 4.5 as well, the same ceiling as the limiter, and you can hear it's a little bit more transparent. It sort of just sounds pretty natural. It doesn't really change the sound of the drum mix. The limiter adds a little bit of color, but the clipper is a bit more transparent. If you push this really hard, it does start to sound crunchy and distorted, but you can get away with a couple of dBs of clipping before you really start to notice any difference to the sound. So that's a preference thing, deciding whether a limiter or a clipper sounds better to you. Ultimately comes down to the mix and what you like the sound of. But having one of those things on your drum bus is definitely important for just controlling the dynamic range of your drums and helping you get your mix louder, because you're not going to have as many spiky transients poking through your mix. If you guys are enjoying this video, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment down below as well. Engaging with the video is the best way that you can help support this channel and make sure that these videos keep popping up in front of new viewers. Really appreciate that help. Okay, the next thing that we're going to do to make our drum sound nice and huge is apply a little bit of reverb. A bit of reverb on the drum bus can go a really long way to just gluing the drums together, making them sound nice and lively, and even a bit of reverb on your snare. You can definitely apply it to all of your close mics, but because I've got samples and things in here, I'm getting a lot of nice room sound already on the toms and the kick. I don't need to add a lot of reverb to the drums, but I am going to add a short reverb to the snare sound just to make it a little bit bigger and a little bit fuller. First of all, let's look at the one on the drum bus. So I've got a send off of the drum bus, and I'm using the LX480 Essentials from Relab Development. Really nice, cheap reverb that sounds great, and it has some pretty good presets in here as well. I've got the Joe C drum room. This is what we're using off of the drum bus. Have a listen to what this sounds like. So you definitely don't want to soak your drums in reverb. A little bit like that sounds pretty nice, adds a bit of liveliness to it, makes them sound a little bit bigger. Too much reverb makes them sound really distant and far away, so you just got to find that sweet spot. Now I have a reverb send coming off of our snare sum, which is where we have all of our snare channels coming into the close mics, and all of the snare samples are going here. And then this is being sent to our reverb, which is pretty much the same reverb as what we had on the drum bus, but we're just pushing it in a little bit more just to make the snare drum a little bit more lively. Yeah, it makes the snare just a bit bigger, a bit fuller. It's like a 1 second reverb. You can definitely go shorter as well, but I like the way that sounds. Makes the snare sound nice and big. Okay, so now's the fun part. This is where we're gonna really beef these drums up. Let's have a listen to what they sound like currently in the mix. They're almost there. They're just lacking a little bit of punch, a little bit of extra energy. They definitely need to be a little bit louder, which we're going to get a bit of extra volume and energy out of these next couple of techniques I'm going to show you. And even though we're getting extra volume and loudness, we're not going to be actually driving the peak level of the drum bus any harder, because we've got our limiter, we've got our clipper on there. We might hit that a tiny bit harder, but overall the perceived volume of the drums is going to increase and make our mix sound a lot louder without actually pushing the peak level up. So that's really cool. And we're going to do this with a couple of layers of parallel processing. There's two types of parallel compression that I like to use. One is when I let the attack be a little bit slower and a little bit grabbier if I want more snap, more punch out of the drums, more transient attack. And then the other type of compression I like to use is a really smashy compression, really fast attack, really fast release. You just crush the drums. You get a lot of sustain out of the drum at the same time, and you don't get a lot of transient. You pretty much annihilate the transient and you just get sustain and crunch and extra energy. So I've set up two buses here, coming off of our kick sum, our snare sum, our toms, overheads, and our room. This is all of our drums in these buses here. And then they've got a send coming to this bus here called attack. This is a kind of go-to preset I have saved with the Slate Digital VMR. It's got the FG bummer, which is like a transient designer, adds a little bit of smack to it. Boosting a little bit of highs and lows, gives the snare a bit of crack, gives the kick a little bit more tick, and also adds a little bit of nice low-end energy to the sound as well. And then we have a slowish medium attack and a kind of medium release. It's kind of grabby. So have a listen to what this sounds like. Now you hear it's mostly just kick and snare. I'm sending a tiny bit of cymbals and room in there, but I don't want the cymbals to become really washy and overbearing. This is mostly to beef up those close mic sounds and just get the transients really punchy. And you can hear it does sound really punchy. Let's bypass this off and on. Takes out a bit of low end as well, the really thumpiness, and adds more of that punch and attack to it. So that's our attack setting. Now the next one is the sustain or the smash. I've got it called sustain in this mix. Have a listen to what it sounds like. We're using the 1176 AE with a really fast attack, really fast release, 4:1 ratio, and just smashing it. So very dramatic difference right there when you bypass it off and on. And this is what's giving our drum some huge energy. Really just makes the snare sound bigger and longer. All of the drums just sound bigger because everything in between the transients is just coming forward, and you get all of that nice, big, boomy, gritty sustain from the drums. Now, what's cool is blending that attack bus and the sustain bus together and just finding that sweet spot between the punch and the amount of kind of like dirt that you need in the drums. So have a listen to what this sounds like as we blend it in. So it's a massive difference. Have a listen to it in the context of the mix. It makes the drum sound absolutely huge. So this is a vital part of that drum sound. Those two different parallel compressions are really making these drums just go to the next level. Okay, but wait, there's more. So we can also apply saturation to our drums. Now you can always apply saturation to the individual channels. You can apply saturation to your snare bus, or just like your snare channel to your kick, whatever. You can apply it here and there as you please, but it's also really great in parallel as well. This is usually how I like to apply it. If I just want to make the kit feel larger than life, then this is one way to do it. So again, we just set up another send off of our kick, snares and toms, overheads and rooms, all of your drums that you want to apply this effect to. You send it into another bus, and this one I've got called saturation. And I've got kind of two options here. I was playing around with Decapitator, which had a pretty different feel, which I like the sound of. I might show you what that sounds like. But then Devil Lock's kind of my go-to. So they're both Soundtoys plugins, but Devil Lock is just crazy. It just absolutely destroys the drums in a really cool way. Like, it's just on steroids. It's just hectic. So you can see I've got the crunch at 4. Now, initially when I did this, I had it around 1 or 2, and I was like, yeah, that sounds good in solo. And then in the context of the mix, I was like, yeah, I can push this harder. I think this sounds cool, a little bit crunchier. So it's good to always tweak this stuff when everything's going. The crush is compression, so we only need a little bit of that. It gets really pumpy, mainly chasing that dirt that we're getting from the crunch. Darkness rolls off the highs, left that. We're not going to play with the mix because we're blending this in. Basically, got it sounding hectic like that, and then again, just put it all the way down and then blend it in until you start to feel it. And then bypass it off and on. You'll really hear the difference. If it's too loud, it'll be really dramatic. So just try and find that sweet spot. Adding weight and thickness and more sustain to the drums, like our 1176 style compression, but just on steroids. It's just like out of control. So that's why it's quite low. And depending on what you're chasing, if you want your drums to be a bit dirtier and a bit messier sounding, having this a bit louder would sound really great. But if you're just chasing a little bit of what this adds, then having it kind of low is nice, just a subtle effect. Now, just quickly, this is what Decapitator sounds like. Sounds kind of gross on its own, but when you turn this down, it actually sounds pretty cool. So even though I'm showing you plugins that I like to use to do this stuff, you can do this with a whole range of plugins. It doesn't really matter which plugin you use as long as you like the way it sounds. And lastly, if you need to add a bit of extra excitement to your drums, if they sound a little bit dull and you want to add a bit of sparkle to them, then we can set up another parallel send and add an exciter to it. For this, I'm using the Waves Aphex Vintage Exciter, have it on auxiliary mode, so all you're getting is the excitement that it's adding. So have a listen to it in solo. It doesn't sound very pretty. So all of that brightness and excitement, we're just going to turn that right down, and then we're going to blend this back in. For this one, I actually have pretty much everything being sent into it. All of the close mics, the cymbals as well. Getting all of that stuff nice and sparkly. And we're just going to blend this in until it feels right. So a little of that goes a really long way. And that's the same for all of these parallel processing effects. Just getting that right amount is kind of essential. You can really overcook it pretty easily. And even just having a subtle blend of these makes a really big difference. So finding that sweet spot is really important. But as you can hear, when we bypass these different types of parallel processing, it makes a really big difference to how big and huge these drums sound. Absolutely massive difference. And as I said before, you may not need all of this stuff going on at once, but knowing that you can use this stuff and how to use it is really essential to getting that really big, larger than life, huge drum tone. And one thing that's really important that I didn't mention before is that all of these parallel processing effects are being fed into the drum bus. The reason I feed it into my drum bus that has my little bit of compression and my limiter on it or my clipper is that everything is going to one location, and it means there's not any weird phasey stuff going on either. Some people like to do it like this. They will have their drum bus going to the mix bus, and then they'll have their parallel drum bus going to the mix bus, and it's not being fed into the drum bus. They're just kind of like side by side, and you can blend them together. Now, this is cool. This is a totally fine way to do it. But the reason I do it this way, where I feed everything into this one channel, is so that the limiter or the clipper on the end really does catch any stray peaks. If you have your drum bus and then all of your parallel effects being sent to your mix bus, you're still going to get some spikes and peaks. If you're doing it that way, I would recommend maybe sending your drum bus and all of your parallel processing to a new drum bus, so drum bus 2 or whatever, and just put a limiter or a clipper on it. So everything that you're doing here is meeting up in one location, and then you can add that clipper or limiter just to control those dynamic peaks that are going to try and jump through. Hopefully that makes sense. But for me personally, I like feeding everything into my drum bus that has that little bit of compression and the clipper or limiter on the end of it. It's worked really well for me, and that's just my style. So you can see the limiter's working a little bit now because we've got that extra bit of parallel processing that's being fed into this bus, and now it's starting to activate that limiter a bit. So one last time, let's compare it with and without the parallel processing that we've added. Let's leave the drum samples in. Let's leave that little bit of reverb in there. Just have a listen to what this stuff adds to the drums, how it makes them just sound way bigger. Even with the drum samples in there, this just makes it sound huge. This little bit of processing that we're adding in parallel. So pretty awesome. Couple of little techniques and ideas there to help you get your drums sounding huge. Thanks for watching, guys. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and if you want to support this channel, make sure you check out that link in the description below. Head over to my website, check out that new sample pack, the Tama Birch Babinga. All the samples that you're hearing in this mix are from that pack. Grabbing a copy of that is a massive support for the time that goes into making videos like this. There's also a bunch of other sample packs over there and mixing courses. Grabbing any of that stuff is a massive support. If you want to hear some more examples and a more detailed rundown on the Tama Birch Babinga sample pack that I've just released, then check out this next video coming up.